and dedicated most of her career to building the framework for measuring program effectiveness. She holds a master's in Latin American and Caribbean studies with an emphasis in human geography from the University of Kansas. As an undergraduate, she studied history, anthropology, and indigenous language at the Universidad de Costa Rica and received a graduate fellowship for the study of Brazilian Portuguese in Vitória, Brazil. Following her presentation will have time for a brief Q&A session in which you may ask some questions. So please, everybody welcome Melissa Velazquez.
Thank you. I will appreciate the silent clap. Thank you so much for inviting me. I'm going to quickly share my presentation here, share my screen. So you can hear a little bit more than just my voice. Let me get my presentation up here for you. Always takes a couple extra steps these days. All right. Hopefully everyone is seeing my screen now. Great, awesome, I got some thumbs up. Well, good afternoon, and thank you again for the invitation, the chance to join this. This is probably an event that I would have loved to participate in when I was in high school, so thanks for the opportunity to be here. Now, as you students, I can imagine that you're mostly here for the competition, but just as a couple years ago, I was unknowingly welcomed into a wonderful learning experience and a cacao drinking ceremony when I thought I was just accepting a little bit of hot chocolate on my way from one home to another in Costa Rica. I hope that this is a welcome surprise and maybe a little bit of a learning opportunity for you as well before you get into the meat of your competition. So I have the opportunity today to talk a little bit about career paths in international development and to tell my story. And my story is connected very deeply to Unbound. As Stephen mentioned, that is my, my current role and my current position is within the organization of Unbound, and that has been most of my career. So I'm excited to kind of share what that has looked like for me and hopefully give you some inspiration or generate some questions for you. So we got a little bit of an intro there, but again, Unbound is an international development organization based right here in Kansas City. And we work in 19 countries around the world with different partner organizations who implement our program around the world. And through that process, we partner with families to support their solutions to overcoming the barriers of poverty and to achieve their desired potential. There are approximately 300,000 unbound children, youth, and elders who are supported directly through our program. And that doesn't even count their families and other support systems that are also involved. And three kind of capstones of our program are self-directed plans. So the people that are participating in our program are working towards their own personal goals. What does that mean for them to overcome the different barriers and challenges they face in education, healthcare, housing, all kinds of different sectors of development. We work with a dependable cash transfer, and that means that families receive the money directly, the financial support that we provide, and I'll talk about that in a second. And then they have community structures that we build around families and community groups to really support them, again, in overcoming those challenges and achieving their goals. So Unbound is a relational model, and it is a sponsorship organization. Many of you may have heard of sponsorship organizations where donors or sponsors are matched with an individual overseas or in a different community to support and encourage them. And that has allowed Unbound an amazing freedom to invest in the micro development of families, not just the macro international development that we might think about when we hear words like developing countries or the global south or work in international studies and development, but thinking about the micro scale, about how do families and individuals experience the world and the complex economic systems, challenges of poverty. However, our model kind of stops there in terms of its connection to other sponsorship models. because Unbound does work with what I mentioned is that cash transfer, which means that instead of providing books or supplies or medical care directly to families, Unbound provides cash. So a family receives a monthly cash financial contribution to their individual bank account. So it's welcoming families into the global banking system. It's encouraging them to invest wherever they see fit. And at the end of the day, it's believing in them, trusting in them. Unbound is based on a belief of subsidiarity. And I never really used that word until I came to Unbound. But what it means is that decisions should be made closest to the people that are affected by them. So instead of me in Kansas City or another international actor making decisions about what a mom needs for her 2 children in a peri-urban area of Tegucigalpa, that mom is able to make those decisions. She's able to choose what's best for her family. She is the most equipped and the most prepared to make that resource go far and to better the life of her family. So we believe in the power of people to direct their own path. We know that systems and structures are against them in many ways, but we know that they have solutions and ideas. And so that is a big piece of Unbound's program. And then finally, that piece about community support. Unbound families are organized into self-help groups or social support groups, and they may invest in things like capacity building, training, literacy programs, small business development. It could be all kinds of things, but it's an opportunity for one mom or one family to say, hey, this is what I'm working towards, can you help me? And to be accountable to one another. As well, we have staff in each of those locations, and Unbound is also somewhat unique. I know many organizations do this as well, but Unbound does not staff our programs around the world with people from the United States in general. So all of our staff are local to the communities in which they work. In fact, some of them even live or grew up in the communities in which they serve. And a good number of our current staff, our global staff of around 2,000, actually were members of our program at one point in time, whether they were a sponsored individual, whether they were a scholarship student, and they've gone on to get degrees in accounting, business management, social work, and are now serving the communities of Unbound again. So that's really exciting to see that community grow. So where do I fit into this, or where does Unbound Kansas City fit into it? So as you might imagine, a global organization, there's a lot of roles out there. I just mentioned our field staff and our teams around the globe are doing direct community work with families. However, here in Kansas City, we also have a super complex staff as well. And there are professionals that are in marketing, journalism, finance, customer service, all kinds of different roles that that people need to play in order to make a global organization function. And the team that I participate on, or the role that I have, is part of a team of about 20 individuals who have direct connection or direct daily communication, daily support to our staff and families around the world. So my particular team is a very multilingual, multicultural team. We have members of our team from Tanzania, from Nepal, from Spain, from Honduras. So all around the world coming together to support and to build policies and structures that are going to help the organization move forward. And the introduction was so beautiful, and I thank you for that. You heard that my current role is International Program Director for Latin America. So I serve our particular team that reaches out to that region with all kinds of different types of support, coaching and development, kind of HR sort of things, program evaluation, facilitating learning, co-creating listening activities. This virtual world has transformed in a lot of ways the work that we do, but it remains really exciting. And then another big component of my role is championing the voice of sponsored families and local staff in the decision-making and policies of our organization. So just as I said, each family has decisions to make about their path, but they also have things to contribute towards our global movement. Nelson Mandela once said that people living in poverty have the least access to power to shape policies and to shape their future, but they have a right to a voice. They must not be made to sit in silence as development happens around them at their expense. So true development is impossible without the participation of those concerned. And that has really been a guiding belief or orientation for my career, is that development should not happen to people or for people, but should happen with people. And so that participation and that togetherness has been a big piece of my work. So I've been with Unbound for about 13 years now, and this has provided a lot of really diverse experiences, but also very specific application of my education and my path to this point. I do love the fact that I get to live and work in Kansas City. My family, my husband, my kids are here. I am invested in the schools and in the community, and I love that. But I also have the opportunity to connect to the global network of Unbound. And I usually travel in a normal year, not in 2020, but in a normal year, usually travel 5 to 6 weeks a year, sometimes more, sometimes less, but spend almost daily in virtual meeting spaces like this with colleagues around the world interacting in different ways. One of the things I also love about Unbound and this career in international development is I love learning. I was like I said, part of the types of programs you're involved in today. And even in college, really exploring theories and ideas and kind of learning as much as I could about the international space. But working in the development sector allows me to actually put those things into practice so that it's not just a idea about development or not just an idea about another culture, another place, but it's working together to solve problems and to ask really, really interesting questions. So one of the things, as was mentioned earlier, that I have really invested a lot of time and energy into over these past years is developing Unbound's framework for evaluation. And evaluation, if you're not super familiar with, is very similar to research, but it's research applied to a practical problem. So working to measure what's working, what's not working. Are these efforts to support families? Do they matter? Do they work? And again, thinking about how do we work with people, building frameworks that are very participatory. What questions do families have about what's working? What is their opinion about impact? Does it matter whether I think something's working or I think it's a good idea, or is it something that is really changing in an individual's life? And I want to share just a little bit of an example. In 2013, I was on one of my first data collection visits to Guatemala. And I was with another coworker, and we were in a truck traveling to a more remote community to visit the first family on our random list of families to interview. And it took us 3 hours to reach that family. And I looked at my colleague and I said, we're never going to get done. We're never going to finish this work. We're not going to be accountable for these 20 interviews that we need to accomplish. But later, as I sat with Andres and his family, and I heard about their complex situation, their situation of multi-generational family, early marriage, education access, connection with migration, I began to realize that his story was exactly the one I needed to hear, because it was going to change my perspective and our global perspective of how our program was working. So now every time I look at a piece of data, I think about Andres and his family and the cost, the effort, how hard it was to get that information, but knowing that each of those data points has a family behind it, has a face and an experience. And if I forgot about that, if I said, oh, it's too hard, I would be further marginalizing his family, saying his family's voice doesn't count, right? And so that has, we can't always do it perfectly, but that story continues to shape how I seek out to do my work. So again, I just want to share a couple experiences too, coming from kind of about my path, like how did I get here? How did I end up at Unbound? A lot of you all are maybe thinking about paths in careers in international development, or at least thinking about where you might want to go to college or what you want to do there. And in high school, I grew up in Manhattan, Kansas. Shout out to the Flint Hills. In white middle class community. My father was associated with the university there, and I had a great education, great public high school there, and I was loving language. I loved Spanish. I was taking a little bit of French, but what really got me excited was the opportunity to learn about the cultures and the people and the experiences behind those communication opportunities. And so I pretty early on thought, I want to do this for the rest of my life. I want to pursue this as my career. And so I did start looking for colleges to study Spanish language and literature. But not just Spanish language and literature, I was also interested in area studies, Latin American studies, again, the history, the geography, what's happening there. And this is my little tip. It's not a advertisement for KU, although I will shout out again to KU as a sponsor. As a graduate of KU, I was looking as a high school student around the country, even around the globe. Where can I go? What can I do? What can I learn? What universities could I attend? I was looking at those lists, you know, the rankings of what top universities are out there. And I was applying to different ones. And I kept coming back to KU. At the time, KU was ranked number 1 or number 2 in Spanish language and literature, and it was one of just 10 national centers for Latin American and Caribbean studies. And that makes a big difference. So if you haven't thought about it yet, think not just about, is this a great school in general, but does this college or university provide an expertise that I'm interested in? Because what did that mean for me? Having KU be one of the top schools for Latin American studies meant they had federal funding, which meant scholarships were available. It meant that there were faculty from all around the world, but particularly Latin America. There were tons of study abroad opportunities, and even the library, something you might not think about, but the library at KU has a huge collection of Latin American resources. So just thinking about those different opportunities that are going to be part of your college experience can really change your decision. And for me, of course, it was an in-state tuition. That was also a bonus, but it allowed me the opportunity to focus, because school is a lot of time, energy, and money. And it allowed me to focus those things on the passion that I had developed for the region and for international studies. I did pursue some study abroad opportunities, as you heard earlier, and also my graduate studies there at KU, focusing on human geography and developing my skills as a researcher and as a social scientist. So then when I was ready to pursue a work opportunity, I was looking around for both international, international opportunities, or also opportunities with immigrant communities here in Kansas City, which Kansas City has a very diverse immigrant population, beautiful opportunities there. And as you know from the IRC, Unbound is one of them, but one of several different large major international organizations that operate in Kansas City. So there are some really exciting opportunities to get connected there. And I just so happened to get connected to Unbound. Well, I wanted to share, as I kind of start to conclude my presentation a little bit, a few recommendations, a few kind of words of advice perhaps for you all. Again, I don't know how close some of you are to pursuing your college degrees or your careers, but I encourage you to align your passions. Each path is very different. And what is so great about international work is that complex and diverse experiences are valued and needed. So there's not a one track, you're not, sometimes I think, again, love the medical profession, love financial professions, but there's sometimes a path, a very specific path that you have to take in order to get to where you want to be. And I would say the international relations, international development can be very non-linear. So be open to opportunities. And I also consider, think about what you as an individual bring to the table. You may have family background, you may have cross-cultural communities in your own neighborhood that prepare you for this path. People used to ask me all the time, what are you going to do with a Latin American studies degree? They didn't understand what that was. And I would always say, I have no idea, but it's going to be really interesting. And I realized that that is a little bit of privilege. I was wide-eyed and optimistic about my future, but it's also an important openness that's been necessary, I think. You have to love what you do because it will not be easy, right? It will not be easy. But I do encourage you to think about what else are you passionate about? Are you passionate about international and area studies? Plus what? Do you love finance? Do you love journalism? What could you do to consider that double major or a minor to combine those two things? Because as someone who hires for an international organization, I often see resumes of people, and sometimes people have fantastic cross-cultural experience, but they don't have a real strong contribution in the professional area. They might not have a strong, they have great experience, but not a strong contribution. And then on the other side, I see some people come around who are great credentialed accountants or journalists or economists, but they haven't invested, they haven't combined that passion with their international passion. They haven't built the language skills. So really think about how to combine those things. And don't stick to the script. Take biology, take dance, explore those different things, because if you love international programs and international studies, you will find the intersections of those things. And then think about clubs, organizations, relationships that you have, even your family, if you come from a multicultural background. Invest in those, explore them, ask questions, reinvigorate your language backgrounds that you might have abandoned or your family maybe doesn't use as much as they used to, and then work experiences. And then my other recommendation would be to pursue complex experiences. And what do I mean by that? I mean, when you think about volunteering, sometimes it's easy to think, okay, what am I offering? What am I doing? I'm doing service hours, I'm putting something on my resume, but what am I learning? I worked or volunteered for a little while for an organization I don't think exists anymore in Kansas City, but it was called the Workers' Justice Project. And it worked with immigrant laborers who had been unjustly impacted by employers or the labor system because of their immigrant status. And I learned a lot about labor dynamics. I learned about immigration issues simply by listening to the stories of people. So while I was maybe serving and helping them, they were actually really building my understanding of the world. I also tutored ESL for a while, and one of my students that most impacted me was a South Korean student. And she taught me so much about how her culture values the collective over the individual and how that comes out in language, even how we talk about ourselves in applying for a job or applying for a school. And that has shaped how I communicate with teams around the world now. Think about study abroad. I know that's something that's exciting to a lot of us, the idea of traveling abroad, the idea of studying abroad, but there are lots of different programs out there. Some programs kind of replicate what you're doing in your home college and take you with a group of students and plop you in a different context. But other programs include things like a homestay or a direct enroll program where you're actually taking classes alongside students from that host country. And what does that do for you? It's very scary. It's very vulnerable. I remember thinking, oh my gosh, if I don't understand this history class, my grade in this class is going to go on my KU transcript and I can't take it back. But what I learned was about the values of the education system in that place. And I was able to now think about when I design evaluations or design trainings for colleagues around the world, I can think, what is the system of education like in their place that may be different from what I'm trying to communicate from a US-based experience. And man, homestays, you all know that family dynamics are different. Staying with a family is a whole new experience, but you learn what do cultures value, what do family dynamics look like, and that's going to give you also a better perspective of your own personal experience and maybe your cultural upbringing. And then finally, language learning. We had a little chat at the beginning. I know a lot of you out there either come from diverse language backgrounds or are learning language, and I encourage you as much as possible, keep doing it. Not just to become competent. Like I would say I'm a Spanish speaker now. I'm not a native Spanish speaker at all. I'm a Spanish speaker now. And I do speak a few other languages to a very small extent. And I mostly have forgotten some of those things, like a lot of my Brazilian Portuguese, or I was able to study an indigenous language, Bribri, when I was at the University in Costa Rica. And I don't really remember much of that in terms of communicating. But what I do remember is I remember what I learned about that culture, a very agricultural based culture, a very environmental based culture. And I can better understand that people group because of that learning process. So keep learning, not just to get the grammar right, but to understand people and understand how to communicate. So in closing, what do I think the world needs now? There's a lot of things that we need. Our world is a big, crazy mess sometimes, but I think it needs a lot of humble self-awareness. There is, of course, a narrative, whether explicit, that the US is exceptional and we're going to save the world, or even implicit in the idea that we need to help everybody. But when I listened to a mom in her home share about her infertility issues caused by chemicals she was using to produce flowers for the US floral industry outside of Bogota, Colombia, that turned the focus back towards understanding my own involvement, my own role. What is my personal and my country's role in this world? Or when mourning alongside a family whose son maybe has died from gang violence in El Salvador, how is that connected actually to the history and the relationship of the US with El Salvador over the years? So keep learning about those perspectives and build your self-awareness, because that's tremendous. And we need to be worthy partners. One of my favorite quotes from one of our founders at Unbound is that we need to be at our best for the poor because they deserve it. We need to be excellent, not to build our own reputation, but because we need to be worthy partners. Why should people trust us to support and to work with them unless we are willing to invest ourselves, just as they've invested and risked everything for their development and for their growth? And then finally, keep learning. You guys are doing amazing work. Being part of this competition, being in the courses that you're taking now, keep being lifelong learners. And I hope that there are many great opportunities for you. So that's all I have for today. I know it was a lot to spit out, but I hope that that maybe just a little something ringed in your ears that you will take forward. And if you have any questions, I would love to hear your thoughts or a question you might have.
If you've got questions, you can put them in the chat screen. I've got a couple of here from some people, but please go ahead and put those questions for Melissa there. And Melissa, first, thank you so much for a great address to us today. That was really fantastic. And in many ways, I'm insanely jealous and wish I had followed in the same career path as you. And I hope that many people on the call today, participating today, will follow in footsteps like yours. One question for you, in this day and age when we are bombarded with information from so many different places, where do you go? This is, by the way, this is not a self-serving KCUR and NPR answer. I'm really curious where you go for international news to keep up on world events, and how important is that for you in balancing that with domestic issues and regional issues?
That's a really big question. One of the things that I do struggle with is sometimes it's too much. There's so much going on in the world. How do you keep up with it all? I am a KCUR listener. I will admit less so now that I don't commute to work. You know, I'm working from home right now, and I have to remind myself sometimes to get my news, because I used to get it in, you know, commuting to work. But a kind of a tip maybe, or a thought, is that I do think it is really valuable, especially if you're interested in the type of work that I'm talking about here, to look for news sources outside the US. So even getting on, like the BBC has a great news app, or looking for, or if you're interested in Latin America, look for some local, maybe a Colombian or a Mexican newspaper that you maybe check in every once. It's good practice because you might get some language practice, but also just having a little bit of a different perspective, because there are some things that are big and major, impacting a region, that never make it to the US news cycle, because we've got a lot going on here. We're dealing with a lot. So I don't know if that totally answers your question, but I do encourage you to maybe look for a couple international news sources. And it can be easy, you know, like I said, the apps are helpful because it can kind of consolidate, at least give you some titles, headlines, and then you can go explore further if you're interested in a particular topic.
Fantastic. That did answer my question, so thank you so much. Here's a question. What languages have you seen in highest demand that students may want to consider studying in school or on their own?
Oh, that's a good question. So, and I actually have a little bit of a personal story with this as well. I mean, Spanish is huge, not only for the region, but also for our country. Spanish is growing as a popular language here. Users, both first language users and second language users. I know that many Asian languages, including Chinese or Hindi, I'm not as familiar. I will say that I'm not as familiar with the Asian side of the world, because that's not my expertise. But I do know that those are very popular languages. One thing I didn't mention is, and I was a beneficiary of some funding in college for what is called a Foreign Language and Area Studies Fellowship. So I received money from the US government to study a lesser known language, but was of interest to the US government. So I studied at the time Brazilian Portuguese. I know Arabic was one, and at different times the US government has designated certain languages of interest. Matthew, I don't know if you've had experience with this, maybe you could chime in. But what that did is the US government is interested in its people being more culturally competent and learning these different languages. And my one regret from my studies at KU is that I didn't take more advantage of some of the lesser studied languages, like Cachiquel, which is a Guatemalan Mayan indigenous language, that were offered there, and also had some funding opportunities. So I think there's a balance. Yes, there's some great opportunities. I thought Portuguese was probably going to be my second best after Spanish in terms of use and opportunity in the career world. But then now I said my regret, because I'm sitting very frequently with families in Guatemala, in the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico, who are speaking different Mayan languages. And so really let yourself explore.
Super. Here's a question from Team 15. What's your opinion on the risk versus reward of taking a gap year?
Okay, that's a good question, and I will admit my gap year was a little bit of a half gap. I didn't do like the gap year where you go off and travel the world. That would be lovely. Sometimes financially that's not possible. I was working for the study abroad office, but I did take a year between my undergrad and my graduate studies as a kind of a gap year, because I wasn't sure what direction I wanted to take. Again, I was very passionate and excited, but I wanted to figure out what direction did I want to take with that research and geography path that I did. And that gap year did allow me to, I was able to do a little bit of traveling and work for the study abroad office. So for me, the advantage was just giving me space to think about my long-term goals. But I also, I don't know, it's not something I would necessarily say you've got to do, or I'd recommend for everyone. It can be, again, expensive depending on how you, you might lose, if you have a scholarship or you are pursuing financial aid, it might be a little bit more challenging to do that. So I don't have a recommendation per se.
So Team 10 has a question here, back to our language conversation. What's the hardest language to you?
Ooh. Of the ones that I've experienced, Bribri, which is a Costa Rican indigenous language, was really complicated. And I think that was partly because I was coming from an English background and a Spanish background, had some Portuguese, but all of those, if you think about language families, the Romance languages, the different language families in Europe, they're all kind of have some similar grammar structures. So to experience an indigenous language that had a dramatically different grammar structure was super challenging. I didn't have anything, I was used to relating verbs and nouns and conjugations back to the languages I knew. And that one required me to start from nothing. So that was super challenging.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. That was a lot of fun. What a great presentation. I hope a lot of you learned something today, and I hope that you'll reach out to Melissa if you've got some questions for her about her career journey. And thanks, Melissa, so much for taking your time and talking with all of us today.
Thank you so much. It was really fun. The invitation was great. And yes, for sure, if you ever have questions or want to look us up, I'm sure that the IRC can pass on my contact, or you can go to unbound.org and get connected with me that way. So thank you.